5 years ago we were drowning. Not in love or in passion but in bills, in mildew, in silence. Our apartment smelled of mold and disappointment. The wallpaper peeled like old scabs, and every night, the ceiling fan made a noise like it was choking on its own rust. We were 29, married too young, too quickly, out of that desperate belief that two broken people could somehow form something whole. Daniel worked 2 jobs. Warehouse by day, rideshare by night. I was waitressing at a local diner, smile glued on, back aching. We never touched anymore. Not lovingly. Just quick brushes in the hallway, like strangers in the same sad play. We talked only logistics. Rent due, car repairs, groceries. I don't think he noticed how thin I was becoming from stress, from shame, from hunger. The first night I saw him, I was wearing a cherry red uniform dress with a broken zipper. He came in late, ordered tea. No food. Just tea and long, slow glances. He looked like someone out of another world. Polished. Silver hair, tailored coat. A watch that probably cost more than my entire yearly salary. His eyes were a soft gray, but they unsettled me. Too observant. Like he was cataloging everything. My chipped nail polish, my fake laugh. The tired way I stood with all my weight on one hip. He didn't say much the first time. Just, "You look like you've been running for years and still haven't stopped." I didn't know what to say, so I laughed. The kind of laugh that tries to fill space. He only nodded, thanked me for the tea, and left me a 20 for a $3 check. The next night he was there again. Same booth. Same order. "I find patterns comforting," he said when I asked. "They give shape to chaos." The third night he brought a book. Something old, leather-bound. He asked if I liked to read. I said I used to. He asked what I used to read. I told him about poetry I hadn't thought of in years. I don't know why I told him. There was something in the way he looked at me that made me feel like a person again, not just a waitress with tired feet. "I'm Vincent," he said that night. He extended his hand like it was a ritual. I took it and his palm was warm, dry, firm. Like he wasn't afraid of anything. After that, it became a rhythm. He came in almost every night. We'd talk in low voices when things were slow. He never asked personal questions, not directly. But he had a way of circling around them, of making me speak without realizing. I told him about Daniel vaguely, about how hard things were. I didn't say I was unhappy. I didn't have to. He already knew. One night I asked him why he kept coming back. He stirred his tea slowly, thoughtfully. "Because you remind me of something beautiful I lost." I didn't know what he meant, but it made my stomach clench. He started leaving larger tips. Crisp bills folded neatly under the saucer. Sometimes 50s. Once 100. I told him I couldn't accept it. He said, "You already have." And still he never crossed a line. Until one night he waited outside. Not close. Not obvious. Just leaning against a black car that shimmered under the streetlight. He asked if he could drive me home. I said no. He didn't insist. Just nodded, handed me a small paper bag and said, "Then at least take this. For your walk." Inside was a scarf. Cashmere. Pale blue. Soft as breath. I took it home and told Daniel I'd found it in the lost and found. Weeks turned to months. Vincent became the shadow at the end of my shift. Sometimes, when the wind howled outside and I'd forgotten my gloves, he would offer me his. Once I came out to find a brand new umbrella leaning by the door with a small note tucked into the handle. "For the rain you never deserved." It wasn't flirtation. It was something deeper. Stranger. As though he was trying to build something wordless between us, brick by brick, without ever laying a finger on me. Then one rainy Thursday he didn't wait outside. Instead he asked if I could take a break and join him at the booth for just 5 minutes. I hesitated, but the diner was empty. My manager shrugged. He said, "You work so hard," he said. "And yet I don't think anyone ever thanks you. Not really. Not the way you deserve." I stared at my chipped nails, unsure what to say. Then he reached into his coat and placed a velvet box on the table. Not a ring. Inside, a thin gold bracelet. Simple, elegant. Too much. "I want to give you something. Not to ask for anything. Just because you remind me of who I used to be, when I still believed in goodness." My throat tightened. "Why me?" I whispered. He didn't smile. He just said, "Because you haven't asked anyone for help." And that's the tragedy. I didn't take the bracelet. Not that night. But I dreamed about it. And about him. It was 2 days after the bracelet that he stopped coming.
No booth. No tea.
No lingering presence by the door. I told myself I was relieved. That I needed space. That it had all gotten too strange, too close. But I found myself glancing at the door every time it opened, holding my breath just a little too long. I even wore lipstick one night, something I hadn't bothered with in months, and hated myself for it. Then 3 nights later he returned. He looked tired, pale, but as composed as always. His coat was still perfect, the silver at his temples brushed like it had been sculpted into place. "Did you miss me?" he asked, sliding into the booth. "I noticed," I said too quickly. He gave a small smile, one that barely touched his lips. "I was in Boston. Business. Dreadfully dull. I thought about tea here more than the meetings." I stood there unsure what to say. Until he added, with a softness that wrapped itself around me like the scarf he'd once given me. "And about you." I couldn't sit, not with the manager watching. So I turned, asked if he wanted anything besides tea. He shook his head. I walked away, hands trembling. But my body felt lit, like someone had flipped a switch under my skin. That night, when my shift ended, he was waiting outside again. Rain falling in thin threads. "I'd like to show you something," he said. "I can't," I started, but he held up a hand. "Just a building. That's all. Something I own." I stared at him. "Why?" "Because it used to be something worthless. Broken. And I fixed it. Gave it new life. I think you'd like it." I should have said no. I should have gone home to Daniel, to our crumbling apartment in his aching silence. But instead I got into the car. The drive was quiet. He didn't speak and neither did I. The city blurred past us, lights smeared with rain. We stopped in front of a tall brick building near the river. Not flashy, not grand, but clean, restored, elegant in its restraint. "It's a gallery now," he said, stepping out and unlocking the door. "But it used to be a slaughterhouse." I looked around. Inside, white walls stretched high, soft lights illuminating empty spaces where paintings should have been. The air smelled like fresh wood and possibility. "It's beautiful," I said. He nodded. Things can be ugly for a long time before they're given the right kind of attention. I didn't answer. We stood in the center of the room, the silence between us humming. Then he said, "I'd like to help you. Not just with scarves or bracelets. Really help you. If you'll let me." My stomach nodded. "Why?" He looked at me for a long moment. "Because I see someone worth saving." And before I could speak, he added, "I don't want anything in return. Not yet. Just, let me show you what it feels like when someone chooses you, without asking you to earn it." I didn't tell Daniel about the gallery. I said I stayed late to help clean up after a spill, something vague and forgettable. He nodded, exhausted, barely looking up from the bills he was sorting. But inside me, something wasn't forgettable. The scent of cedar floors, the warmth in Vincent's voice, the way I felt standing in that open space with no noise, no demands, no expectations. Just possibility. Vincent didn't come to the diner for a few days after that. And just when I thought maybe the moment had passed, maybe he'd moved on from his fascination, he came back. But this time he didn't sit. He walked in, handed me an envelope without a word, and walked back out into the evening. I stared at it all through my shift. My hands itched to open it, but I didn't. Not there. Not under the eyes of my coworkers, who'd already begun making side comments about my mysterious nightly visitor. When I got home, I opened it alone in the bathroom with the door locked. Inside was a letter. Handwritten. Careful, slanted script. And 5 $100 bills. "I've taken a suite at the Rivermont. Room 914. No pressure.
No expectations.
Just conversation. And maybe the chance for me to do something truly good for someone for once." Below that, a postscript. "If you don't come, I'll understand. I just want you to know, the door will be open until midnight." I folded the letter back into the envelope and sat on the edge of the bathtub. My heartbeat was so loud it drowned out the world. It would be so easy, I thought. One night. Just one. For Daniel to not have to work that extra shift. For me to stop counting every penny at the grocery store. for the mold in the bathroom to finally get fixed. I didn't go to the Rivermont that night. But the next day I found myself walking by the hotel on my break. Just walking. Just looking. And when I saw him standing near the side entrance, coat in hand, watching the street like he'd known I'd be there, I didn't walk away. I didn't speak right away. I stood there a foot from him, unsure what I was waiting for. A sign, a reason, a last-minute escape. "You came," he said softly. "I was just walking." I lied. He didn't challenge it. Just nodded toward the door.
Come in.
"You don't have to stay. You don't have to do anything. Just come in." I followed him. My body moved before my mind had a chance to stop it. The side entrance opened into a quiet corridor lined with deep red carpet. The hotel felt like a place people disappeared into, not lost, just willingly forgotten. The suite was on the 9th floor. The elevator was silent. So were we. He opened the door to 914 and stepped aside so I could enter first. I heard the soft click of the lock behind us. Everything smelled expensive. Not loud, not vulgar, just subtle. Like money whispered here instead of shouting. The lights were low. Warm. There was a small fire flickering in the corner. A tray with a silver teapot and 2 cups waited on the table. "I thought you might like something hot," he said. "Iset." Slowly. Like testing ice. He poured the tea. Jasmine. We didn't talk for a while. Just sat there, the silence between us shifting, heating, settling. Then finally he said, "You know I would never force anything on you." I nodded. "And you know I see you. Not the way others do. Not as a tired waitress or a struggling wife." That word hit me. Wife. Like it belonged to someone else. "I see the woman who stayed," he said, "when it would have been easier to run. Who carried everything. Who learned how to smile even when there was nothing left to smile about." I closed my eyes. "I don't want you to do anything that you'll regret," he added. "But I do want to give you something." He stood, walked to the desk, opened a drawer and came back with another envelope. He set it down next to my teacup. This one was thicker than the first. "I don't need to know your reasons. But I think you've earned a choice." Inside were neatly stacked bills. More than before. Much more. And still he didn't touch me. Didn't move closer. I don't know what I expected. A request. Condition. But there was only silence. And that was worse. Because he left the decision in my hands. Made me the author of the story. And I wanted to stop writing it. But my fingers curled around the envelope. And I didn't let go. I didn't leave the hotel. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, the envelope heavy in her hands. $10,000. Me didn't need to open it to know. The number pulsed in my mind like a forbidden promise. Daniel's face flickered behind me eyelids, the quiet curve of his mouth when he slept, the man who once made her laugh until she cried, the man who still believed I was good. Vincent sat quietly in the armchair, legs crossed, the fire casting soft gold across the angles of his face. "You can take it," he said gently, "and walk out that door. No questions, no judgment. Or you can stay, and let me give you what you really came here for." My voice was almost a whisper. "And what is that?" He didn't blink. "You. In my bed. For the night." The words didn't shock me. Not anymore. "I'm married," she said, but it sounded thin, like a line remembered from a play. "I know." I took a breath, long and shaky. What if I said 20? It was a bluff.
A disperate dare.
One last hope that he'd recoil, laugh, let her go. But he didn't. He stood without a word, crossed the room, and returned with a second envelope. He placed it beside the first. 20, he said. My heart beat so hard she thought it might bruise my ribs. My fingers moved before I told them to, reaching for the second envelope, the one that shouldn't exist. My hand hovered there, then closed. When I looked up at him, he was still watching me with that same unbearable calm. I rose slowly. He stepped closer. His fingers didn't fumble. They moved with precision, the zipper at the back of my dress, the fabric falling forward like a breath held too long. My skin prickled under the warm light under his gaze. He didn't kiss me mouth. Not yet. Just brushed his fingertips along her collarbone, slow and reverent, like she was something valuable. I didn't stop him. The bed behind waited like a decision already made. When he finally touched her, truly touched her, it wasn't urgent. It wasn't lust. It was something quieter, heavier. A kind of claiming but without force. My body responded before my thoughts could catch up. Fingers clutching sheets, the warmth of breath at my ear. The way their hips aligned like they'd done this in another life. I made no sound at first. Then only one sharp, low, cut off by his mouth at her shoulder. It was over too slowly. Or too soon. I didn't cry. But I didn't smile either. When I finally slipped out of bed, wrapped in silence and the silk robe he'd left folded at the foot, I didn't look back. I took the money. And left something else behind. I didn't speak the whole way home. The train windows reflected back someone I didn't quite recognize. Hair still tousled from his hands, lips faintly bitten, skin still warm where he'd held me. And the 2 envelopes in my purse felt like they weighed more than the coat on my shoulders. When I walked through the door, Daniel was at the kitchen counter, pouring cereal. It was still early. Too early. He looked up and smiled. "Hey," he said, voice soft with surprise. "You're home fast." Slow shift. I nodded. Dead night. They cut me early. He stepped forward, touched my arm. I flinched just slightly. Just enough. "You okay?" I nodded again. "Just tired." And then I did something I didn't expect. I leaned into him, pressed my cheek to his chest and let him hold me. It wasn't guilt. Not quite. It was the ache of something I couldn't name. Like a muscle stretched too far. He kissed the top of my head. "You smell different," he murmured. "Perfume samples," I lied. "One of the girls brought a tester." He didn't ask more. And that broke something in me. The trust. The softness of it. The way he never thought to question. It was a kindness I didn't know what to do with. Later, while he showered, I hid the money. Half of it in the shoebox where we kept old tax forms. The rest inside a lining I cut open in my winter coat. That evening I cooked his favorite dinner.
Lit à candle.
Put on music I hadn't played in months. He noticed. Smiled. "What's the occasion?" I said. "I missed you." And in some warped corner of my heart, it wasn't even a lie. But that night when he touched me, when he kissed me and whispered "I love you," I couldn't respond. Because another man had already said nothing. And somehow that silence said more than love ever could. It was supposed to stay buried. That night, that room, that version of me. But secrets rot in silence. And sometimes they crawl out on their own. It happened on a Wednesday. Rain on the windows, Daniel folding laundry on the couch. I was in the bedroom sorting through drawers looking for an old photo album. Something to fill the quiet. I pulled out the shoebox by accident. The one I had forgotten he'd ever noticed. He must have opened it later. Maybe not that night. Maybe not even that week. But I remember the shift. The way his eyes started following me just a little longer. How the questions he used to ask vanished, replaced by too much silence. Then one evening he said, "I found something." My heart stopped, but my hands kept chopping vegetables. "Oh, in the coat." He didn't look at me. The coat. The lining I had stitched shut with trembling fingers. Where the other half had been hidden. I turned slowly, the knife still in my hand. He didn't move. "I thought your grandmother died without a will," he said calmly. My throat was dry. She left something small. "I told you." He nodded once. Not angry. Not even cold. Just finished. "Right." And that was all. He didn't yell. Didn't accuse. But from that moment the temperature between us changed. He still kissed me goodbye. Still made coffee in the mornings. But something in him had stepped back. Days passed. Then weeks. Until one night as we lay in bed, his back turned to me, I said, "Daniel, do you want to talk?" He was quiet a long time. Then softly, "I already did. With myself." He didn't leave. He didn't bring it up again. But I knew he knew. And he chose not to destroy it. Which somehow felt worse than if he had. Because now every kindness was a mirror. Every silence a sentence. Every time he reached for my hand, I wondered if he was remembering. If he still loved me. Or if he'd simply decided, this is the cost of survival. And I still woke sometimes with the ghost of Vincent's breath on my skin. But it wasn't desire. It was something colder. A hunger I had fed once and could never starve again. Daniel never asked. and I never confessed. But between us now lives a truth that neither of us speaks, and it watches us from across the table. Every day,